is because people identify with that. So then you go backwards from that and you go, oh, there's a reason that Marge Simpson with her grumbling and whatever is an identifiable character, because a lot of the women watching that are like, yes, that is what's happening. And the guys feel like, I don't know, she's in charge of everything. So we're seeing that represented because it's an actual thing, and I see that a lot.
That's Andrea McTagg, and this is The Shift Show. Welcome. My name is Zac Erickson, and today we have a really great episode that first aired in July 2018, and it is all about family dynamics and how family dynamics behind closed doors in actual homes have been changing over the last 50, 40, 30, 100 years, right? And how with women leaving their homes and working and what that has done to actual families, and how that plays out, and how that's complicated and complex, which those of you at home should know I'm a big fan of. I think that sometimes things we look at as too simplistic or we generalize, and this is something where we can really dive into the complexities. So without any further ado, I'm excited for this for you. Sit back and enjoy the episode.
You're listening to The Shift Show, where we use psychological insight to unravel the craziness of life for you. You growth mindset person, you. Tune in every other Thursday to hear some wacky psychologists demystify what exactly is happening in that weird organ that lives inside your skull. And for this especially delicious podcast experience, we can thank our friends at Shift Psych, the people who deliver a results-driven and innovative approach in therapy land. Throughout the podcast, we'll throw down some serious psych gems, but these are certainly not a replacement for treatment by a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So please seek one out if you need help.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Shift Show. My name is Zac Erickson, and joining me today is founder of Shift Psych and Shiftology, Andrea McTagg. What's going on, Andrea?
Not much. Having a great day. Excited to do this podcast with you. What's new with you?
Not much. Just finished moving. We powered through after moving in, and like all the boxes are pretty much empty now, which is crazy.
That's a really good job.
I'm also like kind of exhausted, but you know, I'm good. Terrible. I'm good. I'm excited to do this. It's been a few weeks since we recorded something, and so I'm really excited to get talking. And we've been talking about this topic sort of behind the scenes for a long time. And I'm really, really jazzed about it to finally be,
this one's one of my huge passion points, and I'm seeing it more and more in clinical, with my clients, and I'm also seeing it just with my friends, and so it's a really cool topic.
Yeah, and that topic, we're not going to keep you on your seats, the edge of your seats too long. We're talking today about families, about how families have changed over the past several years and decades, and what impact that is having on relationships, on mental health, and all of that stuff.
And on happiness.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Just in general.
Yeah.
So it's a big, giant, meaty topic today.
Yeah. So very, very complex, and I do think we wanted to say right off the top, we are going to be talking about things. I think part of the reason is because of so much of the literature is around heterosexual couples.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what we will be talking about is, and both of us are coming from that framework as well.
Yes, definitely.
Right? And so that doesn't necessarily mean that things aren't also changing in homosexual relationships or any sort of LGBTQ situation, right?
Yeah, I think we just, for ease of the language in this particular thing, particularly because the stats and stuff like that are in hetero. And I'm sure we can have another one where we can address some of the complexities in those LGBTQ 2+.
IA. Right?
Where are we at with that?
Yeah.
And we could talk a little bit about that as well. And in fact, I have a guest idea for that.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
I will leave you all in suspense on that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I mean, where do we start here, Andrea? This is such a big topic. Like, where do we?
Well, let's just lay some of the statistics and the groundwork first.
Yeah, let's do it.
So we basically know that, and we're going to do a Canada base because we're here in Edmonton, Alberta. So the stats though in America mirror this as well. So we've got dual income families with kids have doubled in Canada in the past 40 years. So it's a major, major change in only a few decades, right? So basically, what we were looking at in even 1976, you're looking at maybe 36% of families having dual income earners. And that means, only 27% of families right now have one stay-at-home parent, which is quite a change. And we're going to look at some of the effects of that change. And I think another piece that's quite significant is, even 2 decades ago, it was quite common to have mom work part-time maybe, and then dad's full-time. Well, now we're seeing basically 75% of those dual income earner families have both spouses working full-time at least. So we're also seeing, and another factor is we're seeing less extended family living with the nuclear family, right? So more single family units, and then of course more single parent families. So there's been this huge change in the landscape of what family looks like in Canada, and it's had some interesting effects.
Yeah, and I think kind of along with that, right? Like if we're looking at, I think the initial sort of, we're looking at a transition from a period where men were seen as kind of the breadwinner, like the sort of that was the role versus the nurturing role is sort of for the woman's perspective. That it seems to have, there's been a lot of social movement since then too. I know that the previous stat was only 40 years ago, but I mean, still same thing, right?
Definitely. And I think we're seeing a couple different things happen. Before, men were clearly valued for their earning potential and their producers and their role as fathers. And women were really valued for their nurturing capabilities and their housekeeping and their home cooking and all that goes into running a household. And there was a lot of pride in both of those roles. Those roles have become disorganized, which has had great things, right? Like it's more opportunities for women to do different things that they like, and and more rights. We like voting and stuff like that. But what we're seeing is something where it's called the paradox of declining female happiness. So we're getting more rights, we have more opportunities, but women are statistically less happy than ever. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why that is, and then what the implication is for men, because we don't want to leave you guys out either.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because I think, one of the things that I think is just right off the top is the fact that in what I'm seeing, there has been a lot of, if we just kind of imagine all of the different things that need to be accomplished within a family, and I think we'll get into this a little bit, but it's almost like all of the things that women were not allowed to do before, or that were not accepted for women to do, there are now more things that the women have taken on, and that they,
well, basically you're adding another job, right? So it's before, it's like you have job 1 earner, job 2 household, and then now it's like, okay, well, now there's earner and household. And so you just put an entire full-time position on 2 people, and the work distribution it's not working.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's not like in my, we don't see the same shift necessarily for the household stuff to fall to the man, right? There's not like, okay, well, the woman is now going to be sharing the earning side. She's going to be out working, and so therefore the household stuff, the men, at least there's much less of a movement for men to do that. I would say it's still there, I think.
It is, but even if you took it as, you have, and like I said, we're going to use the hetero term. Sorry about everybody. Tweet.
And we also know that there are people out there who choose not to have children. That's totally cool too.
Yeah, we love everyone. Blah, 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 blah. That's our disclaimer with it. Yeah. But we're going to talk about it like this. So basically, even if you have 2 completely equal partners, and you've got 3 roles, it still doesn't work, because now you have full-time plus a part-time role, which is still too much work. So even in its ideal incarnation, it's not working well.
Yeah.
Not for happiness anyways. It might functionally work well, and that's fine. And I want to be very clear that I'm a woman that works out of the home and blah, blah, blah. So I'm not advocating to go back in time to standard gender roles. What the focus of this conversation with us is going to be, with these changing landscapes, like what are we seeing? What are the problems? And what are the new solutions that need to be created in order to fix them?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's an evolutionary kind of thing.
Very cool. Yeah. Because as we are yes, we had a problem before. We're doing our best to solve it. But as we do that, new problems are emerging.
Exactly.
And I think that's what this conversation is about.
Exactly. So
Cool.
no one get all up in a bunch about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we start by talking about some common scenarios that we're seeing in our clients and friends and in the general population.
Yeah, let's do
And we're also seeing it in the research. So it's kind of from everywhere. One of them, and we're going to go through the scenarios, then we're going to talk about maybe the factors for like what is creating them after. And we'll give you some solutions too. How about that?
I like it.
We have all the answers today, Zach. All the answers. We're just going to fix the world, right?
Oh, geez.
Yeah, just kidding. Little exaggerated on that one. Zach's like holding on to his cherries.
Like, wait, no.
What did I get into?
Like,
what did I get into?
Where's the fine print on that one?
So one of the common scenarios is no kids.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got maybe two career professional people, and they get married, and they're forging forward, and they're going to have this equal relationship because that's what everybody's doing now, and these are the expectations. And then they get married, and they move in, and they get married or whatever. And what we see are these old scripts from the traditional gender roles of his or her family of origin popping up in these robot behaviors that cause a disruption in the dynamic. Because it's like, oh no, we signed up for an equal thing, but one of two things happens. So the girl goes back to, traditional submissive gender female roles, and she just wants to be taken care of and maybe doesn't want to deal with the money, doesn't want to earn, or doesn't want to control her spending, and just kind of wants to be cared for in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's scenario one. And the guy's like, well, no, wait, why am I in charge of everything? And why do I have this burden of being the provider? Like, I thought we were going to share this role. And then you get a dynamic disruptor. And the other one is often that we're seeing is that the man wants to be taken care of, and he's a non-participant in household maintenance then. And she's like, why am I picking up your socks? Like, I'm not your mama. What's happening with that? And so we see a disruptor there as well.
The classic thing that I hear a lot when working with couples is, when I get home, I'm tired, and I'm sorry if I don't want to hear about your day right away, but I'm exhausted from work. I need, that kind of a dynamic, right?
Well, and
whereas there's this expectation of, this is my time now, right?
Yes. And we see this like really interesting thing happening where I would get couples in, or I'm working with sometimes individuals, and we do couples work one-sided with individuals because you can change the dynamic, you change the reaction. And the sex life is terrible. And you go backwards. You go, okay, sex. What's before sex? Emotional intimacy. Okay, what's before emotional intimacy? Well, showing care, right?
Yeah.
Care and interest.
Yeah.
So like wanting to know. And so, that guy that comes in at the end of the day is like, I don't want to hear anything about this. I want to play my game or watch the hockey or whatever. Or you get the mom that's super, or the girl in this scenario that's basically just super checked out and wants that caring relationship. It doesn't really want to have an equal dynamic. And then you get disruptions to the sex life as well, as well as just in general the dynamic, and lots of resentment, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But what do we do about this, right? We've got these old scripts, they're activated.
Well, it's so funny, I was just thinking as you were saying this too, like this is a very mundane version of this that happened just today.
Okay.
So we just moved into the house, and we had our drill isn't working, and so we had to go and borrow our friend's drill. And so setting up the curtains, I just kind of had this moment where I noticed, like, I was going into that sort of like, yeah, I'm the man with the drill, and I'm like very much. And my wife and I have this really funny dynamic where we both know that this is what happens, but we both tend to take over. And and it's just like, well, why did you even want my help? It was just this whole big funny thing, but it was just for me afterwards recognizing I'm the man, so I get to use the drill. And even my wife kind of being like, oh,
you're like, where did that script come from, right?
I know.
It's like where they just popped into your head. And I think that's something quite interesting. And we see these scripts popping up in good relationships and in ways where they deteriorate the relationship. So my husband and I, we're married. We have no kids. And
you have those birds though, so
I have my feather babies. I left them at home today, so we don't have them chirping in the podcast. But we have no kids. We're both career people, but we both grew up in households where mom stayed home and dad worked full time and was the breadwinner. So really fairly traditional gender split. They're bacon apple pie and all that whole thing. Yeah. Really classic Canadiana kind of behaviors for 1980s. I'll just age myself a little bit there. Yeah. Anyway. So it was funny because he's normally really good. We worked really hard to establish this very equal dynamic, or egalitarian dynamic.
Yeah.
But the other day he says to me, he's like, well, you never cook for me. And I was like, well, I said, sweetheart, that's because I'm building an empire. So I'm kind of doing that right now. And
Yeah.
where do you have this idea in your brain that I should cook for you?
Yeah.
And it was a slip, and he's like, oh no, I was just joking. But I know if he comes home tonight and
Yeah.
I've made a pot roast
Yeah.
and set the table, that would light him up.
Yeah.
And it's because it's tapping into that old script, right? Where that's what comfort and love
I was going to say the word
like.
that comes to mind for me is nostalgia.
Yes.
Right? Like
Yes.
you're just like, oh man, just growing up and like having all of that, it like brings that rush of memories, and that's all just reinforced.
Yeah.
That's positive reinforcement right there, right?
Because our norms feel right to us.
Yeah.
Even and often, in therapy, we'll have people that have norms that are really damaging. Maybe it's a violent family dynamic or something like that. And that violence later on in life still feels right to them. But it's the same thing on different levels. We have to realize it's not just trauma that reactivates scripts. It's all of these things that are nostalgic, normatized memories that kind of like are these latent programs that hang out in the back of our brain. And then they get activated, and they don't get activated until we're in this scenario. So the professional girl and boy that are dating and they're so equal and they're both killing it at life and blah blah blah, and they're doing it, those aren't going to get activated until they move in together. And she's picking up his socks going, what in the F?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's context derived, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's an interesting one, because really the only way to deal with that is to really get to know yourself and like have an understanding of your latent scripts. So we go back to like, what are your biases? What are your behaviors? What are your limiting beliefs? And what are these maybe values that you have that you don't want to say? Because I think in this scenario, sometimes they want to say things, or I guess it's two scenarios, but they want to say things that are no longer socially mandated. They're not socially appropriate. So the guy can't say like, look, I'm going to feel really cared about when you just cook dinner.
Yeah.
Like that's what I want you to do.
Yeah.
But that's not socially appropriate because you have to take turns and da, da, da.
Yeah.
So I think it's sometimes removing what's socially appropriate in the relationship so that you can have the open discussions about it. I'm not saying don't be socially appropriate, but at least talk about the things that you might have in your mind. And maybe it's okay to tailor your relationship to exactly what you actually like, assuming you have permission from the other person and it's collaborative. You're not just like, make me dinner, get it on the table, girl. That's not going to go over well. But maybe you could say like, look, this is something that I really value and I really like. Would you be willing to do this for me? This is something I'd be willing to do for you, and have those open discussions around it, rather than getting into what happens instead is a bunch of passive aggressive, a bunch of resentment, and a bunch of dynamic destabilizing, where you're just like, stupid picking socks from him, just and then just roll over and not sleep with him that night. Like that's nothing is getting solved in that dynamic.
Yeah, well, it like kind of what I hear you saying is that the social narrative around what relationships are supposed to be like really put a lot of constraints, I think, or like they put a lot of pressure on, like, so if for example your husband was just like, yeah, you know what, like I would actually really appreciate it, that would be really meaningful and important to me, but it's, again, there's that pressure of like, oh well, I can't ask for a traditional gender thing, like hang on, now I'm gonna just be this misogynistic asshole if I just say I just would love to have that sometime, I would appreciate it.
Exactly.
And I think the difference there is there's a difference between just expressing, you know what, I would love that, versus, or I would appreciate that, versus this is what I expect.
Yeah. So I think in these types of scenarios where you've got the two people, no kids, it's up to the couple to write out, to negotiate what is important and how traditional or non-traditional they want to be in those value structures. So in my relationship, I think we've done it fairly well, because we have a very neo-traditional relationship. So we talked about everything. It's the poison of, being married to a psychologist. Yeah. I'm going to like preload all the questions.
Sit down. We have to talk about all of this. I need to know exactly what you're thinking.
Exactly. So I said, look, I'm an interesting paradox, because I'm a hustler, business girl, going out there doing that thing, but I'm also super feminine. So I really like getting flowers. I am not opening my car door. That is not a thing.
Yeah.
Like when it's winter and I'm wearing high heels because I want to be dressed up for our date night, you will hold my hand. That will happen.
Yeah.
And so I know I had a very clear picture of how gender looked for me and how gender roles look for me. I will also bring home like a giant slab of bacon.
Yeah.
I'll do that. But it was creating like a custom built perspective on what I want and what I need in a relationship. And that makes it easier because then you can take that and you can communicate it to someone and you can be like, this is what's really important to me. And then that opens the floor for them to say, okay, well, this is what's really important to me. So I know my husband loves it when, I put on a nice dress and we go for a little date night and he knows I've gotten gussied up just for him.
Yeah.
And it's a very traditional thing though. Like that's a very throwback to the 50s kind of thing, right? I also know that we've talked about certain things because like I have a good understanding of where I'm at. I'm sure it could grow, but I wanted him to have that same thing. So we realized he's much more nurturing than I am. He loves children more than I do.
Yeah.
So it was making space maybe for him to have time with his nieces and nephew more. Or if we did do the baby thing at some point, then I said, it would make more sense probably given our characteristics for you to do a paternity leave rather than me do a mat leave.
Yeah.
And so kind of reordering it and saying like, okay, here are all the components. We can have some pieces of the traditional and we can have some pieces of not. And we can have some pieces of everything. But it's about that communication structure around it. So you're not just like walking around, bumping around into each other in the dark.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, like I think part of what happens as well is that we sometimes treat the traditional or the way things have always been as almost like a moral imperative. Like this is how it needs to be. Like this is, or it should be this way. The man should be working, whatever it is, right? Yeah. Like that is how it should be. And I think that sometimes in counteracting that, like we swing too far the other way and say, no, well, the exact opposite of how it should be. And I would just say, whatever it is, those shoulds, instead, let's get rid of the shoulds and say, the only should is you should figure out what works for you.
Well, exactly. And it was interesting because I think it takes a little bit of time and a lot of thought on these topics to figure out your value set. Like I remember a long time ago, I was sitting down at an Earl's restaurant having a glass of wine and dinner with a friend of mine. And she was, in my opinion, she was like me. That's how I saw her. Like, we're in university, we're studying, we're going to take over the world. And quite confident, beautiful, confident girl. And she says to me, she was talking about her boyfriend and she's like, oh, yeah, I don't think he'd be okay if I made more than him. And I was like, that took me aback because I thought I was like, what?
Yeah.
And then I said, well, what do you think about that? Like, what's your reaction? And she was like, I'm okay with that. And I remember going home and I was like, this is crap, blah, blah, blah. So outraged, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I really had this like super strong emotional reaction to it. And what I was actually having was an emotional reaction to somebody saying that to me, if that was me. So what I later came to when I calmed down and started using some logic. And this probably took a few years, by the way.
Just furious for 2 years.
But what I realized is that was my projection of my value set onto her. She might be okay and might like a man that earns more than her. For me, I wanted equality in that area. But, you go to the thing, and I was talking to another one of my girlfriends, and she's like, well, the flower buying thing, I don't get it. Like, I don't see why boys have to open doors or buy flowers or, all of that stuff. And I was like, no flowers, no door opening, no chivalry. What are we? And equally outraged. And again, I go home and I'm so super outraged. I can't believe that. Blah blah blah. Because I didn't learn my lesson from the first experience, right?
Right. Yeah.
But then I realized again, it's a projection of what her values are versus mine. So then it solidifies your value set. You're like, I do like these like very traditional feminine structures in relationship and the chivalry and all of that. So then you start to write your thing of like, what are my needs? And then how can I communicate them? And then what are my partners and where do they match up or not match up?
Yeah, absolutely. And then how do you navigate those differences as well, right? Yeah.
Well, I think once you take it into negotiation kind of land, it gets way easier because then you can be like, well, I value this. I value that. Okay, well, let's do tradesies and and come up with a solution. But I think at the core of that, what we've got is people not thinking about it, the
autopilot kicks in.
Autopilot, and then not talking about it.
Yeah.
Because you don't, even if you think and you've got all your why and all your needs and your whole gender split and whatever,
Yeah.
you don't communicate to your partner.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
useless.
it's so funny because this was several years ago, I think, but my wife, I think, was finally fed up with me, and this kind of thing was going on, and the sort of thing where I just grew up in a family where my mom wanted a clean house, and so she was like, clean up your mess, and then it was an ADD kid, I would forget naturally.
Yeah.
And then I would come home and my room would be clean or whatever it was, right? And Hillary, my wife, eventually just said, like, you know what? Like, you think you're this like progressive feminist person, and here are several things that I'm noticing. And I was like, oh no. Right? And so then just sort of like noticing those things and working on them, but I would have had no idea if that wasn't the case.
Because it was in a latent script.
Oh yeah,
from,
absolutely.
Your family of origin, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So definitely a bit of that. And I mean, sometimes it's not just also in like work split and gender role, like classic gender role stuff. It's also in communication styles.
Yeah.
Patterns of, I don't know, dealing with conflict. Like it's in everything. So the more you can kind of think about, what did I grow up in? What was happening there? And now how is it showing up in my relationship today? Because there'll be a lot of it. And sometimes it's so frightening.
Yeah.
Like, well, that one for you, you were quite frightened.
I was
shocked.
just like, oh yeah, shoot. Like I'm painting myself in better light than it really was. It was initially nuh-uh, and then after I was honest with myself, it's like, oh, right, yeah, you're totally right.
Well, one thing my husband noticed is I grew up in a family where it was very debatey and very competitive. Like everyone's got to win, and you got to win in the conversation. It's like win, 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 win. And so we had come from a family dinner, and he was like, you guys are like really like aggressively after the win. And he's like, you're totally like that. And I was like, what? No. What are you talking about? And then
he's like, right now.
Yeah. He's like, in the moment. No, but yeah. And then I realized I'm like, oh, I do that. So then you can inform a different approach or attempt to anyways. Yeah. So we've got the girl wants to be taken care of kind of scenario. We've got the boy wants to be taken care of kind of scenario in the way that they were taken care of in their family of origin. So we talked about basically the solution to that. Figure out your why. Go to therapy for that.
Yeah.
And then communicate with your partner about what they are. And probably the why from the needs perspective, like what are my actual needs in relationship and what are my perspectives on it, and being okay with liking some old school stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
Or
absolutely.
Like anything. And if it works in your relationship, right? Well, and it was interesting because I was talking to a stay-at-home mom. And she really took a lot of pride in the stay-at-home mom thing and enjoyed it, and is great at it, super connected with her kids, lots of pride in how she keeps house, blah, blah, blah. But when she would go to a cocktail party or something, and people were like, well, what do? She's like, I felt this deep moment of shame. And she's like, and I feel it every time. And she's not the only one that said this to me. Like, I see this as a pattern with the stay-at-home mom thing. Yeah. Because back to the whole the paradox of declining female happiness, is we used to so value that. And it goes into like teeny little examples, like Barbara makes the best pierogies on the block, but Karen makes the best chocolate zucchini cake. Like these things where they were pride points for women taking this traditional role. And now we've devalued that role of the nurturing feminine so much that this poor lady who's awesome at her job, which is being a homemaker, feels that shame because society has this kind of weird judgment thing about, like, I think parts of the traditional.
Yeah. And I would say too, like when you, for some reason I'm imagining people out there who are reacting to that, like to the devaluing the nurturing side. And I wonder if it's that we've devalued it, or that it's almost been pushed aside. It's not that we don't value it anymore. It's that like there are so many, kind of like what we were saying. It's like we're adding additional things on as well. I think
it could probably be a combination. I think there is a bit of devaluation. Like, I can't speak today, but anyway, there is a bit of that because there is like, well, what else do you do?
Right. That's no longer
what
enough.
else do you
Yeah, I
do?
think that's kind of what I'm saying too.
Yeah,
Is
a little
that
bit.
it's that it's
Oh, yeah,
that
I
is no
can.
longer enough anymore, right?
Yes,
It's
it
a
can be
smaller
both.
piece of the pie, but it's because there's more
More stuff.
more stuff.
Well,
to do.
and I think that this is like one of the things that is implicated in this. There needs to be more, and we talked about it a little bit on our money episode,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, why do we need all this stuff? Like
Mhm.
the rampant consumerism. I think that gets into it a little bit as well. But I have a friend. They're married. They're lovely.
Mhm.
They have 2 little kids, and she stays at home, and he works in the trades. And their kids are like gorgeous, sweet, very, very inquisitive, very like very, very on. And she and I were having a conversation. She's like, "Well, I'm trying to figure out what else to do." And I was like, "I would bet that in a day you do
Mhm.
a hell of a lot more than me. So why are you trying to figure out what else
Yeah.
to do?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "Yeah, but you're this and da da da." I was like, "Well, that's socially. I'm like, you're raising humans.
Mhm.
That's the biggest job ever."
Yeah.
Because that's
Absolutely.
what society will look like in whatever many years.
Yeah.
But it's
I wonder
interesting.
I wonder too if part of it is I think it as well, like it's a difference between social expectations, which it sounds like for her
Yeah,
that
yeah.
this client you were talking about, that's more of what where the shame was coming from, versus I think there's also the more
Like
I guess
personal
the
fulfillment
more
thing?
personal fulfillment. Yeah, I guess
Yeah, and
that's
I
what I
think
was saying.
that's where the choice comes in, where it's good.
Mhm.
Because if you're doing something that you really like and it's an addition, and not every girl wants to be. I certainly am not cut out for being a stay-at-home mom. That would
Mhm.
be not good. For ADD
You could sell
is
Scentsy at home
so
and
like
you
I could not do it.
there you go.
I would just have a different business open and anyway.
Yeah.
But it's not saying that everybody has to occupy that or everybody will want that, but I think it's about that custom built reality piece,
Yeah.
which is kind of the thing that we push at Shift or try to make happen
Mhm.
here. Okay, let's talk about another scenario.
Yeah,
How
let's do
about
it.
that? Okay. So career boy and career girl with an aim of equality do really well with that, and they're crushing it with their careers, and then they have kids.
Mhm.
Then she takes a 1-year mat leave, which is what we get in Canada. America, catch up, please, a little bit,
Oh my
but we'll
goodness,
talk about
yes.
that a
Yeah,
bit.
let's do that.
And actually, we have Sweden to catch up to, so there's different things with that,
Yeah.
which we'll talk about later.
Mhm.
But so she takes a 1-year mat leave and becomes the expert on the child, and so then he doesn't have the knowledge of the child, consequently, right? Like
Mhm.
what they like to eat or when or how to change
All
the
the little
diaper.
quirks.
Exactly. How to calm him down if he's crying or whatever.
Mhm.
Because kids are quite complicated as far as I understand. You
Yeah.
would be more of the
Yeah,
expert on that.
absolutely.
I'm like, birds are complicated, but I feel like kids top them by quite a bit.
Absolutely.
So basically, then she returns to work. So with the wrong limiting beliefs active, this leads to a lack of male role in parenting.
Mhm.
Because he's like, well, I don't know how to do it, and maybe if she's got the I need to control everything,
Mhm.
you get your hand slapped for trying a few times, and then you'll just pull out of it.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, well,
Absolutely.
you've got this, and it creates like an apathy. It can create control and dominance in the female, because this is something your baby's something you super care about,
Yeah, absolutely.
and you don't want things like done wrong.
Yeah.
And so there's that urge to correct
Yeah.
and become very critical, or just
Mhm.
become very dominant. Like, this is mine more than yours.
Mhm. Or even just the frustration of like, wait, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing it that way? Like, why don't you see that it's this way? Right?
Or
this
even
is
just
obviously the better way to do it.
Yeah.
Or this.
or that clinging thing where it's like they want to be the most important person. That's another thing that we see.
Yeah.
They want the kid to, it's like when a kid falls, scrapes his knees, who does he run to?
Mhm.
That kind of thing. So there's some like messed up stuff that happens with that. It also creates resentment in the dynamic on both sides, because
Mhm.
she resents being overloaded and overwhelmed, because now you have to do work and do everything, and
Mhm.
he's just not helping around the house. He never helps with the child, and blah,
Mhm.
blah, blah. Or maybe he does, but he doesn't help on the big things like booking
Mhm.
dentist appointments and macros
Mhm.
versus like,
Yeah.
making the chicken fingers. And then the other thing it creates in men is a feeling of lack of purpose and lack of connection to the dynamic.
Mhm.
Because if you don't have that role in the family anymore, you can feel very excluded and you can feel very purposeless.
Mhm.
right? So it creates this whole mess, and it destroys the dynamic of the relationship, it destroys the dynamic of the family, and the male and female happiness. Sex life, of course, goes, and the male becomes disengaged, and the female becomes overwhelmed and burnt out. So
Well, and like this one also, it also reminds me. I think we were mentioning this yesterday, but there was some commercial that I saw. It was some, I can't even remember what it was, but it was drawing on the stereotype of the bumbling idiot dad, which is one of my, if there's one thing that I see on TV or whatever, and there's like the Phil Dunphy thing where it's like clearly, like in Modern Family, where it's clearly, I'm okay with that because he's endearing and adorable and whatever, right? But I think there was this commercial that I saw that was just like, it was basically just the dad and the kids, and almost this narrative that, well, mom's got to take care of dad and the kids, and the dad is another baby. Yeah, exactly, right. And I think that narrative is really like, I think this dynamic that you're talking about really is a good explanation of where the core of that is, right? Where she's going to take care of the baby first, and then I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't have as much experience, or whatever it is, and then that whole cycle.
Well, happens. And I think you pointing out how common that narrative of the bumbling father is in media. Mm-hmm. We got like The Simpsons, Family Guy. You see it in commercials, and it was on cling film, a Glad cling wrap thing of like, the baby's left with dad for the day. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
It's like, what? Well, and even just the whole thing of like, oh, well, dad's babysitting today. It's like, no, it's my freaking kid too. Like, what?
Yes. But the thing is, it is, and I think all these media is a representation of what's happening in society often, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason they do that is because people identify with that. So then you go backwards from that and you go, oh, there's a reason that Marge Simpson with her grumbling and whatever is an identifiable character, because a lot of the women watching that are like, yes, that is what's happening. And the guys feel like, I don't know, she's in charge of everything. So we're seeing that represented because it's an actual thing, and I see that a lot with my clients, particularly those with younger children. Because I think that's when the initial shock of, oh my God, this is what it's like. This is what it's going to be like. That's where that is. That's like 0 to 3.
And this sort of moment of, oh man, this is not okay. This is not sustainable, or whatever it is. Yeah.
And it's, I didn't sign up for this. I don't like this. And now I'm stuck. Now I don't know how to get out of it. Like what happens now? And then what does happen? You kind of, you need to reset that dynamic. And it seems very daunting. But dynamics are actually not too bad to reset, because you just have to change one person's actions in it, right? But in this particular dynamic, so let's talk a little bit about how to solve it. So we talked about all the negative, and let's talk a little bit about how we solve it. So basically, what's required to solve this dynamic is, there's a couple of things. We basically need the father to have a role autonomously in parenting. So you got to get the mom out of the way. You're like, Mom, get out of the way. Let dad figure it out. Even if, he's going to feed him apple juice and chicken fingers for the next week or whatever. Whatever, let him figure it out. Eventually he won't, because that's how she would have learned not to do that as well. So there's getting the mom out of the way. That's a problem, because if we've got limiting beliefs that are anchoring it, like I need to be in control, or I'm responsible for everyone, those have to be killed. So that's what we do in therapy. We just get rid of those. And then you have this space that you can create for dad to get fully involved with the kid and take ownership, because the key in that one is ownership. Like both parents have to have ownership of the child. You can't have it like lopsided where one has way more and then the other one has less. And I mentioned maternity leaves. So this is an interesting and very controversial subject. I had a discussion about it this morning, and someone was asking me about what my perspective on mat leaves are. And I was like, well, I think they're good in terms of like, women have to heal after, and there's a thing, and, nursing and but they're also really bad. So the fact that in Canada, it's almost exclusively maternity leaves. There's a rise in paternity leaves occurring. Very, very small though. I think, have you ever heard of anybody taking a paternity leave?
I have, but usually when I have heard of it, it was like, Yeah, but she's got a better paying job, and so it just made sense. Like it's much more about like
Money.
the money than anything else.
Versus
in that
like,
situation.
I want time with my child.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, what women say.
For a man to say, I want to go on maternity leave because I want to spend that time with my child, that's crazy talk.
Yeah, that's what's wrong with you, sissy
Yeah, it's
boy?
like, why are you so lazy?
Yeah.
Is what that would be.
Yeah,
right?
you
Like,
just want
technically you could do it, but...
Well...
That's and again, I'm not saying that I agree with that, but...
So...
And I don't even know if it's a technical thing, depending on the situation.
Well, it's interesting because, we talk about, there's a lot of dialogue in our current zeitgeist about equality, equality for the genders. So I have a friend, and he works for an oil company in Alberta, which is basically like half of Alberta. I get that. But I was talking to him about this maternity leave, paternity leave thing because I had been reading a couple of studies out of Sweden and Norway where what they did to create more equality in relationships is they mandated that part of that parental leave period had to be taken by the man. Or the other partner. Yeah. So or you'd lose it.
It had to be shared.
It had to be shared. Otherwise, you would lose that part.
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't know the full amount of like how many months it was, but it was a little bit more for the woman and a little bit less for the man. And, same-sex partners could do this as well.
Yep.
But if he didn't take it, it's just gone. So what families were doing?
So it's like the woman only qualifies for 6 months or 9 months or whatever, and then if he doesn't take it, that's fine, but she's not getting any more.
Exactly.
Okay.
So what that did is it turned the dynamics around parental leave upside down.
Wow.
Because what are families going to do? If someone's like, "Hey, Zach, you got 3 months off to spend with your kid. Take it or lose it."
Yeah.
You're gonna be like, "Well, sure."
Yeah.
So what they saw was a massive increase in paternity leaves.
Yeah.
And a normalization of those paternity leaves in society. Like, oh, you're on your paternity leave. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So is Jack, and so is Tim down the street, and so is I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
Atom. So what we saw with that then was less divorce, also less marriage. Interestingly, we'll get to that one in a bit. But better harmony in the households, and those places that do that have the highest rate of chore sharing and household participation and parental participation, because now you're the expert on the kid as well.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's calming. So it's not mom being, domineering or a control freak or whatever, or just being burdened with it.
Yeah.
And it's not dad taking a back role because he knows what he's doing. And there's an engagement there.
And it's interesting too, because that you talk about like certain milestones within parenting. Basically what they've done in that situation is that they have just manufactured this whole new like rite of passage where every couple now has this rite of passage of passing the baton to the other partner. And like, okay, well, what do we do? And like there's you would be forced in that situation to learn how to work as a team.
Yes.
Right?
And we know
and to both be in each role. We
know the thing from organizational psychology and from what I know from running businesses, what makes a team cohesive is a shared goal. Like that's out of anything, like not money, not incentives, not anything like that, a shared goal where you're all pulling for the same thing. So you're going to create more stability, because if we're trying to get to the same place and you're sucking at something, I'm going to be inclined to help you versus roll my eyes and be like, oh, Zach didn't do his part of the work and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like, so it really created a huge shift in the dynamic. So when I say I'm not an advocate of maternity leave, it's sole maternity leave.
Right.
I'm an advocate for parental leave that's shared and mandatory for the guy, because that's the only way it will work, because we have to change a norm in our society. So anyway, but back to my story about my friend who works at the oil company. We are so ready to call it out when anybody is treating, the LGBTQ community or women or different races unfairly, or treating them with sexist policies. But what I realized in that conversation with him, I was like, oh, so if I worked at your oil company, I could take a maternity leave, I would get some government pay, EI, and then they would top it up for me. So I make my full salary for the year. If you took a paternity leave, you wouldn't get that. And you'd probably get docked in your whatever bonuses or promotions or whatever. I don't really understand that world. But and I'm like, that is an actual concrete example of sexism.
Yeah.
And what's even more wonderful about this sick example is that we can call that out, but because it's happening to men, it doesn't matter because you guys are so,
Yeah.
you're so privileged.
We've won the genetic lottery or whatever you want to call it.
And you throw the white on there too.
Yeah.
But the thing is, who does that, if you look a little bit more zoomed out, who does that actually damage? Well, that's going to damage potentially his relationship dynamic, in terms of equality and the child. So you're actually looking at these really short-sighted policies that don't actually help promote equality. And everyone will have this manufactured outrage around that because, she should get more and blah, blah, blah. And I think that that's been the conversation with maternity leave in Canada has been about how it should be 18 months long and women should get more time off. But it's like, but actually look at the actual research around it. It actually doesn't make women happier when executed in the way that they're proposing here. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, what do we do in the meantime? Like, because I mean, any policymakers out there who are listening to this, please get on it. But what do we do in the meantime too? Like,
well,
you know what I mean?
It depends on what level, right? Like you can always, lobby the government with information and studies because there is a good breadth of peer-reviewed research around this. It's just that we don't read it because it's mostly European.
Yeah.
And because we're entrenched in this narrative of like women, like the value of mom, but a lack of value in dad. So we're not realizing that kind of narrative is what creates inequality in our relationships and consequently in our societies. Because if it's inequality in the family, it's going to be inequality in the nation as well. The thing that we can do, so my husband and I were talking about it because we were entertaining the idea of the baby thing or whatever, and we were talking about it kind of from a philosophical perspective. So he's like, well, what would we do about that? Like what? And I was like, well, it would be shared. Like I would take a mat leave and you would take a bat leave in whatever order. Usually it works best if mom takes it first because there's like physical needs there, right? Yep. Or nursing or whatever. And then I was like, then you would. And he's like, well, that would cost a lot. And luckily we're in a position where we could eat that cost. And I think a lot of families could eat the cost to a certain point.
Yeah.
And this is obviously excluding, dual income or dual working families that are minimum wage earners and just like that's not an option at all. It's
just not an option. Yeah,
which is unfortunate, and that's a whole nother topic. But it's kind of creating that space. And if you can't both go back in time to take the paternity leave, because obviously when you got a 5-year-old, you're like, can't do it now.
Yeah.
Then it's about creating space. So the moms who have to realize that, I've had the chance to become the expert on the child. So I need to pull back and leave autonomous parenting time with full ownership and responsibility for dad. And I have to be encouraging, not critical.
Yeah.
That's what will reset that side of the dynamic. And with the dads, they have to demand that.
Yeah.
They have to be like, hey, I don't want to just take them to the park. I want to sit there and book their dentist appointments because that's what creates that ownership. It's doing all the boring shit, right? And getting involved in that. And then for the couple, it's working together to identify these weird little scripts from before or these things that aren't working and go like, what is not working about this? Why are we pulling against each other rather than towards each other in the dynamic, and address that? It comes back again.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that first one a lot as well. Yeah, for sure. Because I think that is, it's been interesting. My wife works 2 weekends off, 2 weekends on, and so there's been a lot of sort of me playing the primary caregiver on the weekends a lot of the time, and it has actually been one of the best things for just our whole family because now it's like no, I get I understand what it takes to hold the house together, and so. And even
That's cool.
Again, just even recognizing the roles, right, of or those scripts from before, right? Even I hate it, and even at the time it would come up for me, but that sort of coming home and the house is a mess, right? And it's like, why is this house a mess? Like nobody was, you didn't have to work today, and whatever.
You were around here all day.
And then just the other day. I'm like, I'm going to very quickly run downstairs, have a shower. These kids are just playing upstairs. And I come back 10 minutes later and my 1.5-year-old son is standing on the counter with an upside down box of cereal, like all over the kitchen. I'm just like, oh, this is how quickly chaos can happen, right? And so I'm just like, oh, okay, all right. Like having moments like that is good, right?
Well, so what you're saying is you developed an appreciation for what actually goes into it.
Absolutely.
Because it's kind of like, okay, so back in the day, I used to be a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone's been to school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, well, this teacher sucks, or that's there, and my kid's not learning, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Same thing. It's like, well, watching it is not the same as doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're kind of like, oh, well, that seems easy. You just stand up there, talk about paragraph writing for a little bit, and you're
Mhm.
like, you don't see the background.
Mhm.
And I think that's what, with your
totally.
weekend full autonomy parenting, is like, now you see the background. Now you see
Yeah.
why they're not just like gorgeously asleep in their beds when you
Yeah.
come home. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, because we had to do.
And
like,
when I come home and it is clean, I'm like, oh, how did
you
like
are a
I'm still
goddess.
kind of in this moment where I'm like, how is this even possible? Right?
when
It's
you
like
get
like I'm still kind of learning some of those things too, right?
That's
But,
when you get a
yeah.
super. Then you like start looking at her like, I need your magical
I know.
Jedi skills.
Like, yeah, like teach me your ways.
Yeah, exactly. But you see how even like in that the tone of that of like,
Mhm.
teach me your ways. I want to learn this. Let me know this. Or oh my
Mhm.
God, all this cereal everywhere. Are you seeing this?
Yeah.
I'm seeing this. It gives you a different appreciation for the thing.
Mhm.
So I know I use my birds as like babies and whatever.
Mhm.
It's kind of ridiculous. But so I had my first bird when my husband moved in with me. And, she was mine. And I
Mhm.
just did everything. And I would be bossy. I'm so bossy because
Yeah.
I have a bossy tendency.
Yeah.
So I was like, don't touch her. Don't do this. Like, don't leave the stove on. How could you do that? Like,
Mhm.
super. And this was definitely a script from my family
Yeah.
of origin.
Yeah.
Where mom was always like, nee about everything. The classic, naggy female.
Mm.
And so I opened the practice in Calgary. So I started to have to leave her with him.
Mhm.
And I was like I used to cart her down and like drive her back. It's funny
Yeah.
when you go to the hotel and you got like a parrot on your shoulder. But I got the second one, I had to leave them. And so when I came in the door, and it was from a weekend trip away, and I would like ask him 40 million questions. Did you do this? Did you check her water? Did you give her vitamin? Like whatever. And I come in and I go towards her, and she skittles over towards him, and he starts petting her head. Now, the thing about my little parrot
Yeah.
is she's an asshole.
Oh,
Like,
totally.
she's mean.
Yeah.
And so I go to pet her because I was like, what? And I go to pet her, and she hisses at me. She's like, ah. And they start having this nice little moment where he's like petting her head. And I was like,
Oh
what
no.
happened here? And I realized that he took really, really good care of her.
Yeah.
And she, in that moment, thank God, not forever, just
Yeah.
in that moment, because I would have died. It was
Yeah.
heartbreak. Ugh. In that moment, she was showing me like, no, he's got me. I like this.
Yeah.
And he was showing me, is like, I can do some things that even you can't do. Because
Mhm.
till today, he's allowed to pet the top of her head, and I'm not.
Oh,
I can
that's
pet
so
her
funny.
belly. It's a weird thing, but it's kind of like that. It's like maybe they're even better than you.
Mm. Which is terrifying, by the way.
Terrifying.
Right? Like,
Such
that's-
an ego kill.
Oh, totally.
But if you're talking about wanting like the best care for
Mhm.
like for this thing that you super love, whether it's your child or your pet parrot,
Yeah.
like what a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So do you want to do third scenario?
Yeah.
quick?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So we've got overachiever career boy, overachiever career girl. They get married. They have kids. They put them in a million different activities. They work a million hours. They do their own household maintenance because, my dad used to, and they forego date nights and family dinners and relaxation. And they end up with no relationship dynamic, an unstable foundation, because you actually have to know someone to be in love with them.
Yeah. You end up being roommates.
Yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah.
So the roommate thing, disconnection from the children as people, because you're feeding them a sandwich while you drive off to hockey practice because they're going to be a 5-star stunner,
Mhm.
versus like sitting down and being like, so who's your best friend?
Yeah.
And then you get burnout because all you're doing is hamster wheeling it, right?
Mhm.
You're like running here, running there, volunteering here, doing that, blah, 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 blah. And then you get numbness, lack of joy, exhaustion, of course, because definitely not having any sex when you like fall into bed after
Yeah.
waking up in the morning, going to work, picking up so-and-so from daycare, driving them to like ballet and driving the other one to the crossing paths, high-fiving your wife, and then falling into bed.
Yeah.
That's like not a thing. And then you also get, and this is an interesting one that people often don't link, is you get a sense of purposelessness.
Mm.
There's a definite lack of purpose, because if you're on this hamster wheel and you're just going, 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 you're like, wait a minute, this thing's not a road, it's a wheel.
It's like, wait, why?
Why am I doing this? And let's start from there. Let's start from a little bit of
Yeah.
like why do people do this? Because I'm sure you've had clients that are in the same thing. I see it more and more with my kind of overachiever people.
Yeah.
So it's actually more common in our higher socioeconomic classes.
Because there's is that because there's more ability to do those things? Do you think?
I think so. I think it's like
opportunity.
You can afford hockey, you can afford ballet, you can afford swimming lessons and soccer, and there's also more competition. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in like the different kind of socioeconomic brackets, but it's definitely really prevalent in the high achieving people, because they have that constant sense of striving built into them. So just like this weird robot thing that's like, oh, then my kids have to strive and then we have to strive. And it's interesting because often I'll talk to them. I'm like, okay, so you've got job number 1, job number 2, parenting and household. And then now you have like this job number 4, which is also like make them have the most experiences possible.
Yeah.
And that's what good parenting looks like, which is, we know research wise, that's not what it looks like at all.
Yeah.
For all the parents out there, it's spending time with them.
Oh yeah.
Doing like whatever, period, that's it.
And like
quality.
The example, I can't remember where I had even heard this, but I think one of the things that I personally find is just like, you know what? Like if you can do like 15 minutes, especially like, again, I have small kids, right? Like 15 minutes of wrestling on the carpet 3 times a week, like that's a pretty solid relationship with a kid.
Oh,
right?
definitely.
And so
well, I mean, I think about, when you think about childhood, you think about, well, where were your memories? So I was a competitive dancer. So I spent a lot of time in a dance studio. I can't remember the content of a single one of those classes. But one thing I do remember is I was probably about 7 years old, and my dad had gotten like little pieces of wood and little like birch bark. And he sat at the table and we made like a little miniature cabin out of this. And we hot glued it together and we cut out all the pieces, and he taught me how to use a knife. Very daring.
Yeah.
And we glued this thing together, and I could tell you every single step of building that cabin. And it wasn't because we were doing that. It was because he was there.
Yeah.
So kids and quality of time, that's like the huge big game ender. So like they're not going to remember that you're yelling the most encouraging things from the hockey arena.
Yeah.
Like that's not a thing. So then we go back into it's like, okay, well, why would people do that? Why would people do that?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones that I've heard is, oh, well, I just want to give them, I never had all these opportunities and I want to give my kid as much as they can. And my parents never did things for me. And so I want to do it for them. And
yeah, that's one. So that's a latent scripting. And then there's also the constant sense of striving. So the thing about parenting and limiting beliefs is that your limiting beliefs will go on to your kids.
Oh, totally.
So if you have, I'm not good enough, I need to be exceptional. Guess what's happening to little Johnny, right? Yep. And then that's where you get hockey dads from.
Yeah.
Or I guess in the States you get football dads, but something like that where they're just like little too intense about it, and they're like 9-year-olds playing.
I grew up in a town that was full of people like this. Yeah.
Because you grew up in a football town, right?
I grew up in a football town and I did not play football. And it was made very clear to me, like, you should at least try out for football. And I was cut, the very first one cut on that in like my grade 7 tryouts. And I was like, all right, that's good. I tried.
I'm done. Well, it's funny because there's kind of like, basically you're saying there's like 2 religions in the place that you grew up.
Yeah. Totally.
So we will have these like often this achievements, constant striving orientation comes from the parents' own limiting beliefs. So we've got I'm not good enough, or I am less than. That's a big one that's implicated, or I'm inferior because then I have to be more, or I'm insignificant because then I have to be significant. Well, medals, trophies, piano practice, like we see this also, and also there's a cultural piece where we see it more in certain cultures. I was coordinating the after-school achievement programs for the Korean Association when I was, early in my teaching. And it was crazy. Like these kids would do like an extra 4 hours of school after school. And then they would get a break to play an hour and a half of violin, cello, or piano. And then they would go back to it. And it was just focus. You see this like rat race kind of thing. And
it's interesting. Like there's this sort of, I wonder if part of that is, I think we see this in, I'm going to mess up my terms here, but I think first generation native immigrants, like what's the actual term for that?
First generation. So I'm a first gener.
Right. Yeah. So like the parents come in, parents are immigrants come in and are, just like really have to really work hard to prove themselves and that kind of a thing. And then onto the kids, that's, how that affects them.
And like, so I can speak to it kind of, okay. So my mom is East Indian. She is from Goa, but she grew up in Africa. And she came over from Africa with a bunch of people who would be kind of like my aunties and uncles, but they're not like blood.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, you just know family friends that are kind of super close. And there is definitely, a competitive spirit in that community, because like you come here and then your children become a representation of you. That's why Chantel, who works for Shift, she is a first generation Filipino. And we like to have these like funny first generation conversations. We actually said we're going to do a podcast about it.
Cool.
But we're talking about, the immense amount of pressure put on kids to achieve. And we were making a joke of it because we said like immigrant status, there's a couple of things. So when I met my husband, I was like, he's like, oh, do you think your parents are going to like me? And I was like, oh yeah, you get 2 solid immigrant points. And he's like, what? I was like, you're an engineer. So if you can't be a doctor, then you can be a lawyer. If you can't be a lawyer, then be an engineer. Psychologist is nowhere on there, by the way. So anyway, those are the top 3 immigrant professions. And I said, and so you got the engineer point, and I was like, and you have a PhD, which makes you a doctor. So you got double immigrant points. So I'm golden now. I think I'm beating the siblings.
Oh,
so there is this thing about putting dreams that you have had like for yourself that you couldn't realize maybe because of circumstance or culture or whatever, immigration, that's a big circumstance, putting those onto your kids. But people do it whether that's a factor or not. It's just I think it's why it's more prevalent in certain communities. So you kind of have to go back and go into like, what are my limiting beliefs and how are they splaying out upon my offspring?
Yeah.
That's kind of the
absolutely.
thing.
Yeah. Because I think it's funny because we, just I'm thinking about that. And I feel like this actually is one where, if anything, we're like, it's almost more of like, I feel like we should have our kids and stuff, right? And we're like,
Well, and I think it becomes like a dialogue around like what's good parenting.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't know as much anymore about what's good parenting. I think like probably if you go generations ago, parenting looked like getting them to help you. So teaching them how to garden or make pickles or whatever, because it was very much like children as a utilitarian concept, as opposed to children as like, I don't know what you want to call it now, but enlightenment and child focused and whatever. And sometimes they just actually want to learn. Like when you've got little guys at home, do you have any toys where it's just the copies of like adult toy or adult thing? A little lawnmower.
Oh, totally. We bought this. We have this. It's like a tool bench, and it's got like the little plastic saw that bzzz when you pull it down and stuff like that. Yeah, totally.
I think those tools, those toys are good representations because they actually are like hints at what children actually want, and they want to spend time with you in the world doing what you would do, like modeling.
Yeah.
So, and we know an attachment and growth theory, and that's why like traditionally like kids play always mirrored like, playing house, copying mom and dad, copying dad fixing thing with the drill. There you go.
Yeah.
My nephew has this like teeny little barbecue and it like sizzles and everything. So he's like barbecuing. It's just cute. But that's what they're trying to do. So it's an indication that it's actually okay to just have them kind of putzing around copying you, not just, in all these scheduled activities. Some are good. I mean, there's definitely benefits to sport. I think it's how much, and then what is that taking away from? The concept of the family dinner has become a very different thing.
Yeah.
Like the prep stages of that have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and then the eating it together has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And I think there's, going to be some seriously devastating effects in people's ability to make connections without that component there.
Yeah, I think for me it comes down to really getting clear on like what are the most important things that are going to you want to make sure happen, in order to be able to form those relationships with your kids and with your spouse or your partner, and just knowing, like having some way that you're planning on doing that. And then if there are other things that you want to do, that's fine, but that's because you prioritize these other things first.
Yes.
And
exactly.
so like for my wife and I, it's like, I think that we could probably do better of like making date night a regular thing,
Mm-hmm.
but we're at the point right now where like, yeah, it feels like it's like, yeah, it feels like we need a date.
You're like, you hit crisis point and you're like, who are you again? Oh yeah, let's go flirt.
Yeah, it's like, oh, hang on, we need a date night, right? And so.
Well, I think that's the thing. So in our couples therapy, and Zach, you would know this because you do couples therapy with us. We do this kind of needs and relationship thing.
Yeah.
So you have to write down like what all your needs are in the relationship from another person, and it could be like, I need flowers monthly.
Mm-hmm.
Husband, pick up on that one. So I need.
It's been a while.
It's been a while. I need flowers regularly. I need quality of time, date nights, or whatever. So you have this whole list of stuff, and some of it's like I need. Dysfunctional things too. Like I need you to not touch anything when I'm in the kitchen. It's my kitchen now.
Yeah.
But what we actually should be doing as well is like needs in family. So what are your needs for your family? And you can only know what your needs are if you know what your why is. So what is my purpose? Like, why did I have children? So why did you have children, Zach?
Wow, you just threw that one on me.
Sorry.
No, I would say it's because, like, the weird question is like I feel like at the time it was because of those scripts for a certain part, but I think it was also just wanting to create a person, right? That doesn't make sense, right? But I had this feeling of being able to raise a child in an environment that is going to be nurturing and accepting of who they are and really allows them to express who they want to be and focus on that. So
nice. Yeah. So you wanted to develop someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a very beautiful reason for it. And I think it's kind of like, okay, if you know that, so let's pretend that's your why. And then you go back, you go, okay, well, what do I need to do to achieve that? Like, what are the needs from the family? What does the family have to create? What checklists do we have to hit in order to make that happen? And it's a pretty easy one because you basically said you want, to build a great person.
Yeah.
So you build a great person by giving them the ingredients for greatness, which we know with children, it's like high but fair expectations. We give them positive reinforcement.
Yep.
We give them appropriate consequences. We give them connection. We give them quality of time, opportunities for learning, and opportunities for adventure. And so that's what you're doing, which is very, very cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like it with the little tool set and whatever.
Yeah, which is funny because going back to the idea with that, like I don't even own that kind of thing. And so when we first bought it, my son did it for a little bit and he was like, I don't even know what to do with this because I've never seen a real one. so we're like, oh. Why doesn't he play with this? And now if we would have gotten him something, maybe a little more relevant to his life or to our life or something. But anyways.
I think it's kind of an interesting one, right? And you want to train them early, so get them like the little mini vacuums. You're like, you love this, it's fun, right?
There you go.
No, I think it's interesting because we do really, really shape our dynamics, and I think that there's this feeling sometimes where you can get bowled over by the dynamic if you're in one where it doesn't actually fit what you would like. It's not want based. You're in a fear based dynamic. It feels like it's like overwhelming you and then you're powerless, right? But when you go, okay, wait, let's step back. I can actually change this. And I think that's for all the listeners, what I would most want them to understand is like, you can definitely change the dynamic, particularly a relationship one, because you're half of it. That's like having 50% shares in a company.
Yeah.
You can vote on all kinds of shit with that.
Yeah.
Families are a little bit different because you might only have 25%, so it makes you a minority shareholder then. It's not as impactful. But when you are the parents and the family is like the kids and they're young, you're kind of like the board of directors at that point.
Yeah.
So you want to use your board of directors voting rights in the right way, but you have to know why you're voting on what you're voting on and then strategize it. And so I guess at the end, it comes back to that communication piece as well, like being really, really conscious, like because we've got all these unconscious latent scripts and being like, okay, those are there. Let's try to get as conscious of them as possible. And then let's strategize. Like, let's make a game plan. So if that's your game plan to have children to develop wonderful humans that are able to be themselves and have that opportunity to express however they want or achieve whatever they want, then it's like, well, what are the ingredients for that? And then when you've got a partner to talk about that with, which is super cool. So yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting.
Yeah, and I think that with that too, as the kids get older, you really have to make sure, and I think that this maybe is what contributes to some of the craziness and where this particular scenario of just being overbooked can happen is there is a balance and like a collaborative effort between what the parent wants and why the parent is engaged in this, and what the child wants, right? And seeing like, okay, well, I understand that you want to do this and this and this and this and this, but that's crazy town, and here's the right. And so like I think allowing the child to make choices and develop a sense of confidence and a sense of direction and identity, but doing it in a way where you are mentoring them and almost like they're steering and you're the brakes almost. I don't know.
Well, no, it makes sense. Okay, so it's like you're talking about developing. I got real Southern there for a second, developing these things. What you're talking about is developing a sense of reality.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you want. That's beautiful, but this is what's possible. So, because that's a good thing to know as an adult. You want to know what I can actually do when I can't. And it was funny. I was talking to one of my favorite clients in the entire world yesterday, and I was asking we were talking about this. She's in this scenario where it's just like all things overloaded and burning out. And we were talking about one of the kids' activities, this very time-consuming one. And she was like, well, he really likes it. Like, he really wants to do this and this and this and this and this. And I was like, does he also like candy?
Yeah.
And she's like, and she says this. She's like, Andrea, go to goddamn hell. I'm like, yeah, I'm just saying that I'm sure if you were like, oh, here's dinner tonight and here's a plate of gummy worms. Yeah, he's going to want to eat the gummy worms. But sometimes as a parent, you have to exercise what is best, not only for the child, but also for your dynamic, for your family. Because we all know that the best thing you can do is create a stable, nurturing dynamic in the home. And two parents that have time for a date night because they want to hold hands and they want to know about how the other person's day was.
Yeah.
That's a huge ingredient for that stable foundation, right? So it's prioritizing properly. Don't go prioritizing kid first. Prioritize parent first and get that stable dynamic down because the kids will enjoy it. And that's one of the best things you can do for them, right? Because then if you're all burnt out, like what use are you?
Oh, yeah.
Just
absolutely.
Useless parent.
Exactly.
Just kidding. That was a little harsh.
Well, and that's the thing is that we, in our experience, like whenever we've really noticed like, oh man, like having trouble with one of our kids, we kind of have had this moment several times where it's like, wait a minute, hang on, like how are we doing? Like, and it turns out like, things are, like especially sort of that transition from graduating from university to like that next however many months. There were like first time in our married lives where we got called to the office. What? Right? And we're like,
yeah, you're telling me about that.
Right? And so like that's a really important thing. Is that relationship between the two of you is going to impact them for sure.
I love that you said that because you're basically like, okay, so kid gets called to the office and you looked at yourself first. Like that is parenting properly. That's awesome. Because
and not in like a guilty, shamey sort of way.
No, but in a what's happening way.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and I think that's such a beautiful thing. When we see kids, it's often like got a piece of the parent. Maybe they're picking up on that energy or whatever. But what a great perspective, Zach. That was really good. That was quite the gem.
Yeah. So I think that really was it. And I mean, looking back, I feel like it was a challenging time, right? It's like you're graduating, and then all of a sudden, okay, you got to find a job, and then you got to get clients, and you like all of that sort of like that. The financial stress from graduation to that was just like there was a lot of tension there, and then we kind of recognize that. But for sure, of course it's going to impact the kids.
Well, I think the thing is you're circling around is this like, and we'll leave them with like this one last gem. How about this? You're circling around in whether it's like having an argument or your relationship dynamic isn't working or your parenting isn't working or the kid's not working. It's like, it's so much more productive to step back and look at yourself.
Yeah.
versus like,
Oh,
oh,
absolutely.
you're not doing this, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, I've seen that like even in hiring people and having employees or people that work for you, it's easy to be like, oh, so and so's not doing this, but it's like, well, what did I do either to help them, hinder them? Like, where is my fault in this? Because we all know dynamics, like you got ownership somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think, and I think that's a really powerful example that you gave, because you showed an example where your first step was to go like, whoa, where am I in this one? That's great. Yeah. So I think that that's the big one.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Shift Show. Be sure to check out our website, shiftpsych.com, for more great content to help you optimize your life. Follow us on social media at ShiftPsych, and let us know if you have ideas or things you'd really like to hear about on the podcast. If you found this useful or interesting, which you probably did since you're still here, please share and review the show. And make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This lets us know that you like what you hear so we can bring you more of it. The podcast was brought to you by Shift Psych's results-driven mind trainers. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Shift Show.